It's a place of soaring spirit and staggering beauty. Today, Yosemite belongs proudly to the people of the United States of America, and in a special sense, to the millions of visitors from 5 other continents. Who then, what human hand is custodian of this masterpiece of nature, of creation? Some 3,000 years ago, a tribe of Native Americans peopled this paradise. They called themselves the Miwok. Hunters and gatherers who built villages of tree bark and ground acorns into a mush that is the staple of their diet. The earth is their mother, and the sky their father. In an age when the Spanish are hiking up the California coast, converting native peoples, the Miwok people had never heard the ringing of a church bell, nor had they ever seen a missionary friar. They were an inland people, sequestered in their untouched Eden. Then, in the middle of the 19th century, an adventurous group of prospectors are warned by the Miwok chiefs not to penetrate their sacred precincts. They ignore the warning, and 2 of the prospectors are slain. White settlers are alarmed, feel threatened. A battalion of volunteers is recruited to subdue the Indians, corral them, then ship the whole tribe to a reservation. Now the battalion stumbles on a site that today we call Inspiration Point. These are the first whites ever to behold the Yosemite Valley. A chain of wars, some just skirmishes, drums the Awanichi out of their ancestral homeland. It's common knowledge that the United States Army is officially the administrator, the custodian of Yosemite until 1913. What is not so readily known is that many of those Army custodians are Buffalo Soldiers, African Americans, of a regiment formed of freed blacks during the Civil War. Between 1891 and 1904, some 500 black soldiers of the 9th Cavalry and the 24th Infantry serves as custodians of Yosemite. Despite the rampant racism of the times, these Buffalo Soldiers help establish a model of national park management. In 1916, the Parks Administration is turned over to the federal government, and the newly formed National Park Service takes over. But getting there is difficult, and sometimes dangerous. First, one must set out from San Francisco by stage, or wagon, horse, or train. That trip takes as many as 14 days. Then, it takes 2 or 3 more days to get over the mountain and into the valley. The time is the Great Depression, turning bankers into beggars, brokers into bums. On the streets, war veterans are selling apples or pencils. Youth is grim. No college, no jobs, no future. That is, until the CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps, is formed, giving jobless young men from 18 to 25 work. One volunteer states that he enlisted as a teenager and came out a man. At one time, forests covered 800 million acres of the continental United States. By 1933, there are only 100 million acres of virgin forest left. CCC units are ordered to Yosemite. Firstly, they dig out non-native plants, unwanted growth which is destroying the park's great woodlands. The CCC fixes roads, making the park more accessible. The CCC builds a stairway up the eastern face of Half Dome. Over 80 years later, park visitors can still test their endurance on this demanding climb. The reward is a well-deserved view of the whole valley that makes the adventure complete. Another Park Service addition to Yosemite was the mule tours. This tour was on Panorama Point Trail. Nevada Falls is in the background. Today, a visitor could still explore the park by horse or mule on a choice of beginner trails or the more advanced rugged trail. The CCC makes the park more comfortable for visitors by building benches and shelters. It fights droughts and floods and wildfires. Then, with the increase in people who can afford their own automobiles, the number of visitors soars. Traveling to the park in the early part of the last century was a real challenge. The park's remote location in the Sierras could require weeks of travel on sketchy roads. But getting from Southern California to Inspiration Point required travel through one of the park's most treacherous roads. To make this trip less hazardous, the Park Service came up with their own inspiration, a tunnel under the mountain. So starting in 1930 and working for the next 2+ years, the crews worked tirelessly to cut through the mountain. Given the dangerous conditions in the tunnel, amazingly, there were no deaths or serious injuries during the excavation. When it was opened to the public in 1933, it became the longest automobile tunnel in the U.S. The tunnel still saves time for the thousands of motorists who travel to the park. Today, Yosemite attracts almost 4 million visitors a year, not only from the United States and Canada, but from Britain and China, Paris and Peru, Sydney and Tokyo. In a year, more people than the population of Denmark. The connection between these millions, with their hopeful wants and their human needs, and the marvels of Yosemite, are the men and women of the National Park Service. By their welcoming smiles, they're familiar, and by their trademark Smokey the Bear hats. Rangers are issued uniforms for every kind of activity. They are like soldiers, whose aim is not to kill but to protect, not to destroy life, but to sustain it. The scope of their responsibilities is staggering. Operating medical facilities where falls, sunstroke, hypothermia, dehydration are treated. Operating tours, post offices, gas stations. Leading trail rides. Providing interpreters for visitors who don't know English. Conducting, in sign language, a program for deaf visitors. Lending handicapped visitors motorized wheelchairs on which to tour the park. Now the Rangers are operating a comparatively new program called Girls on Granite, a supervised climbing adventure for women only. What these heroic Rangers must deal with in the future is also staggering. Certainly the impact of the millions who come here must be controlled, the number of visitors strictly limited, or they will destroy the natural wonders that attract them. Poachers and runaway forest fires are no longer the enemy. Today, the enemy is pollution. Today, it is climate change. These are enemies that the dedicated men and women of the National Park Service are preparing to fight.